حي على الفلاح.
نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم وصحبه واتباع الحماة للدين القويم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم اجعلنا دعاة إليك وإلى رسولك. اللهم صل على سيدنا وشفيعنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد مبارك وسلم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. وقال الله سبحانه وتعالى في القرآن الكريم: فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول ولا تبدلوا أعمالكم. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في حديث عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه: من أعانى على خصومة بظلم يعينه على ظلم لم يزل في سخط الله حتى ينزع. صدق الله وصدق رسوله الكريم. وبعد، إن الحمد لله تعالى. All praise and all glory is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We praise and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the favors that He has blessed us with, those that we receive and recognize, and those that we receive and yet do not recognize. It is by the ni'mat and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are privileged today to be here for Yawmul Jumma. Out of the ni'mat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the gift of the Quran and having iman upon this Quran. وعلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, who has been the guide and the Mawla that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been as the best of ni'mat and Mawla for all of us, who have guided the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam on this path of Sirat al-Mustaqim. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, through his infinite mercy, has described many incidents in the Quran in his lifetime of how he lived his life. And amongst the challenges in his time and in our time, subhanallah, the reality of what the Quran brings to us is a reality of what is happening to us in the world. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his infinite mercy says to us: Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasool, obey Allah and obey His Messenger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this clear indication in the Quran that obedience is to Allah and His Messenger. And then He says, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا أَعْمَالَكُمْ, and do not throw away your deeds. And do not throw away your deeds. Subhanallah. This ayat is very unique because He gives two things as the important part of our life for success. Ati Allah wa Rasool. And then He says, and do not throw away your deeds. So it is important to understand the relationship of this ayat, this verse, in relationship to what Allah is saying to us. Do not throw away your deeds. How can we throw away our deeds? Anytime those deeds are not in ta'alluq and in connection to what Allah and His Messenger has given as a means of guidance for us, as a means of our living and our discipline, our life in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it is not along this line, then our deeds to batilu will be abandoned. There will be no benefit to us. Why mentioned upon the importance of this is that our deeds, if we want a good result from it, If we want a good result from our action, it must be in obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. So good benefits and good deeds are only which in the alignment of that of the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Why this is important for us to recognize? Because our success in this world is dependent on this. We can make good deeds, but without the obedience of Allah in them, in our consciousness, in our awareness and the actions, then there is no benefit in it. And why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the condition of other people in the world. And amongst them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions concerning them about the people of Quran, the Muslims, and the people who do not have Iman, the non-Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran a very important lesson for us to learn. فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أحسب الذين في قلوبهم مرض أن لن يخرج الله أضغانهم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أحسب الذين, do you not perceive, understand, or think, or become aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أحسب الذين في قلوبهم مرض, that Allah does not know what is the sickness in your heart? Do you not think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not know the sickness that is in your heart? And what is He referring to? أَيْ لَنْ يَخْرِجَ اللَّهُ أَضْغَانَهُمْ, that you feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have the ability to bring that forward before everyone. Many moons that we have been around, we hear the story about Pinocchio. You know Pinocchio, that story? Every time he tells a lie, the nose of what? Good. That is our Maulana. What is within you? If it is only that what is within our hearts used to have an effect on our body from what we say and do, what will be the condition of us? This is the reality of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about. أَحَسِبَ الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ. Do you think Allah doesn't know what you have inside your heart? And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so will, He could have made apparent every action and thought within that mind and this body that we do, that we don't want anyone to know, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I know. And if I want, I could have made every single trace of it apparent on your body. Every single piece of it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never did that to us. But He mentioned this for a purpose. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not just leave this way because there's a level of bitterness within every human being. There's a level of bitterness that we live with amongst ourselves as Muslim to Muslim. And there's a level of bitterness that we have Muslims against non-Muslims, and like non-Muslim against Muslims, and non-Muslim against non-Muslims. In every human being, there is this quality of bitterness. And this bitterness comes from the quality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about, which is zulm and oppression. When we don't like somebody, we don't like the quality of somebody, we try to do things to keep them down. And that is a bitterness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about, which is zulm. One of the most destructive things for all our deeds to disappear. Now He says, وَلَا تُبْتِلُوا أَعْمَالَكُمْ. Do not throw away your deeds with zulm. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this further and He says, وَلَوْ نَشَاءُ لَرَأَيْنَاهُمْ لَرَأَفْتَهُمْ بِسِيمَاهُمْ. But wait, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, if you feel that what you have inside of you will not manifest itself, it will manifest itself in the way this person will look towards that person. In other words, you tell by this person the way they make themselves appear. They're seemingly, their way, their condition, their behavior, their emotions, their body will tell what they believe, what they practice, and what is inside of their hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you'll see it from them, you'll see it in their condition. لَعَرَفْتَهُمْ بِسِيمَاهُمْ. And then He said, وَلَا تَعْرِفَنَّهُمْ فِي لَحْنِ الْقَوْلِ. And when they can't hold it back no more, then bitterness come out of their tongues. Then they started speaking words with undertones, and you know something is wrong with that person. Nobody who loves somebody will speak in a manner that is what? Hurtful to them. Will say undertones and will send messages that will cause harm to him or to anybody else. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this, في لحن القول والله يعلم أعمالكم, and Allah is well aware of your actions. This is the quality of dhulm and oppression that we bring upon ourselves and upon people. And today in the world, we have to understand how this sickness works. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this with the ta'weel, and He says, فَأَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ وَإِذَا مَوْءُودَةٌ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنبٍ قُتِلَتْ. He says, when the young child, the young girl child will be asked, بِأَيِّ ذَنبٍ قُتِلَتْ, for which sin I have been killed. What sin I have committed to be killed? Before the coming of this deen al-Islam, the Arabs, the people at that time, their life and behavior was such that the parents, when they had a girl child, used to take them and bury them alive. They used to bury their girl children alive. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that He will ask this child, بِأَيِّ ذَنبٍ قُتِلَتْ. Why ask the child? The criminal, the person who commits the crime? Allah always commits the crime. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, why the child should answer for this? There is two sabab and reasons the Mufassirin and commentators mention. The objective is that at the time that this child was being killed, there was no one around preventing this from happening. There was no one to stop this action from happening. Why? Because they all had that belief in them and that practice and that custom that they were doing nothing wrong. That they were doing nothing wrong. Yet it is one of the biggest sins, or one of the biggest crimes against a child. Such a wrong that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they themselves do not even understand the idea of what is justice in stopping such a wrong, such a dhulm, such an oppression on a child like this. So there is no one to prevent it, and now this is the day of Qiyamah. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ready to give Ahlan justice. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking this child in front of the people, everyone, mother, father, the cow, the people, everyone around. No one stood up. Today Allah is asking this child, and what is the answer to this? What is the sabab and the reason, and what is the answer to this? Is that they themselves were involved in the level of dhulm and oppression, that they had dhulm and oppression. They were jahil and ignorant of their crimes against one another. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His infinite mercy gives this child the opportunity today to show that all these people here, they were committing the same crime. Because no one stood up against it. Whoever sees a sin that Rasulullah mentions, you should stop it with your hands. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ, then by his tongue. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ, and if he cannot stop it with his hand and his tongue, then at least by his heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ, and that is the weakest of iman, the weakest of faith. Today in the world which we are living in, with the most amount of Muslims ever existing in the world yesterday, the largest population of Muslims in the world is in our time. And in our time, there are thousands of children being killed. بِأَيِّ ذَنبٍ قُتِلَتْ, for what sin are they being killed? For what sin are they being killed? What did these children do to die? To born in the wrong place, the wrong time? Or what did we do to stop it as a large population of Muslims in the world? So much wealth we have, subhanAllah. So much wealth in the Muslim world. and still can do nothing. So much of everything that we have, technology, every means, and still can do nothing. It tells something about the Muslims and the people in the world today. What is the difference of the people at the time before the Arabs come in the world and the Muslims in the world today? What is the difference? What is the difference between us and them, and we cannot even do anything? بأي ظلم قتلت. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this is dhulm and oppression upon some people who we are all connected to. This ummah is what we always proudly say, this is one ummah. Let's see, try taking off your toe and see, but this is only one body, take off your toe. You lose not much. Don't feel no pain. Don't feel no hurt. Don't do anything. This is the nature of what we are seeing in the world today. Yes, all the diplomacy, all the talks, all of the arrangements that we are seeing in the world, yet every day children are dying. They are dying. Who is going to account for this before Allah? Who will account before Allah for these deeds? Whose actions are these? Which time are we in? Which place we are in? What can we do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His infinite mercy, He mentions in Hadith Qudsi, the Hadith in which Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam narrates a very important message to us. And He says, Ya ibadi, Allah Rabbul Izzah says, O my servant, inni haramtu dhulman ala nafsi, I have made dhulm and oppression haram upon me, that I will not commit dhulm against any of my creation. Allah Rabbul Izzah will not cause and commit the dhulm against any of His creation that He has created. And then He says, وَجَعَلْتُهُ بَيْنَكُمْ مَحْرُومًا, and I have made haram that you commit dhulm amongst yourself. I have made haram that you commit dhulm amongst yourselves. فَلَا تُظَالِمُوا, so do not do this. Do not oppress one another. See, when you look at the condition of the Muslims today, we are so much engrossed in dhulm amongst ourselves. How do we have consciousness about any other thing that exists? We're busy fighting about our own selves with dhulm. Think we are going to worry about anybody else? Amongst our own self. So the condition is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions this hadith and says that Allah Rabbul Izzah is saying He does not commit dhulm and He doesn't want us to commit dhulm because it is haram. It is haram. We don't eat haram food. We don't commit haram act. But yet we see when we oppress one another, that is nothing wrong. But Allah, Messenger of Allah is saying it is haram. It is a haram act. But one will do such an action. And then He says to us, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions to us in the hadith the relationship towards what is mentioned to us. Ibn Abbas says, Allah Rabbul Izzah says, and the Messenger of Allah says, he says, ittaqi da'wat al-mazlum, be careful of the du'as of the people who are oppressed. Ittaqi al-mazlum, be conscious of the people who are oppressed. فَإِنَّهَا لَيْسَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ حِجَابٌ, between them and between Allah there is no hijab, there is no barrier. Their du'as are accepted. Their du'as are accepted. There is no barrier between them. So whenever there is an action of dhulm and oppression, note that the condition is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts the dua of the Muslim, the one who is being oppressed. And He says, ثلاثة دعوات مستجابات, there are three groups of people whose du'as are accepted. لا شك فيهن, there is no doubt in it that their du'as are accepted, that their du'as are active. دعوة الوالد, the dua of parents, the du'as of parents over their children, their du'as are accepted. وَدَعْوَةُ الْمُسَافِرِ, and the one who is in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their du'as are also accepted. وَالدَّعْوَةُ الْمَظْلُومِ, and the dua of the oppressed. That is also accepted. Another hadith also mentions وَالصَّائِمِ حَتَّى يُفْتِرُ, and the dua of the fasting person until they break their fast. These, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, mention this, understand the condition and the quality of what it means for madhloom, one who commits a wrong against somebody else, one who oppresses someone else. And when we see oppression in the world today, one of the things is that if one person is oppressed in this ummah, we are all oppressed. And if we don't consider ourselves to be oppressed, then we cannot be from this ummah. And it's our responsibility to make dua and ask of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, beg of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fix the conditions that we are in, and beg for Allah for our izzah and our honor. Allahumma izzah al-Islam wal-Muslimin wal-Muslimina fi Palestine, at this point in time, the people of Palestine. Because this condition that we are seeing before us, my dear brothers, my dear sisters, is that this is war will be answerable for all of us, the entire ummah that is present in this time. And this is not about just this time, but many situations like this have happened in this place. But we ourselves have never even communicated it to the extent that we are seeing it in the atrocities that we are seeing now. That we are feeling that there is some major thing to happen. And one of the biggest worrying to us is that maybe Qiyamah, the signs that the end of time is coming closer. So this is our worry. But the worry should be, what is really happening right now? Qiyamah, to you and me, we are not sure when this is going to happen. Or what the sign that is going to come. But what we have to do is what we have to do now amongst ourselves. Ulama recommends that if we really want to fix what is happening, we should stop committing dhulm amongst ourselves. Firstly, fix ourselves against dhulm. Do not oppress anyone. Do not oppress your family, your children, your neighbor, your friends. Do not oppress anyone. Because that's the first step of fixing our lives in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Stop the haram. Stop that wrong. And then continue the acts of sadaqah and ibadat and beg of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whatever we can do to make a difference in this condition that is before our situation in the world today. Even though we are far away, we can do something. Whether it is an economic situation that we can work on, let's work on that. But whatever it is, though is wrong, and we have to put our foot forward, our hands forward, our lips, our speech, everything must be put forward before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The greatest power on this earth and over this earth is Allah. The greatest of strength and power is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is never a nation that came on the face of this earth that they were so powerful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in their dhulm and in their oppression, Allah destroyed it. Allah destroyed it. But who stood up for Allah and begged from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs to make themselves known before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make ourselves known before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make it aware that everyone, even the non-Muslims, are speaking against the oppression that is happening today. What about the Muslims? How much are we doing? How much are we doing? We should be doing even more because it's our limbs that are being affected. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His infinite mercy bless us and help and protect and safeguard and grant all the martyrs of Palestine and Palestine Jannat, inshaAllah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them the patience and the sabr under their conditions, and all the Muslims of different parts of the world that are going through different types of trials and tribulation at this point in time. May Allah accept them and may Allah forgive them and grant them the best of rewards and goals, inshaAllah. May Allah give us the strength to fix our lives too, so that we ourselves become worthy of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us our shortcomings in this life, and may Allah reward us with the next one with Jannah, inshaAllah. Sadaqallah wa sadaqa Rasulih al-Kareem wa akhir da'an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.